morning, everybody. You are listening to K-Talk Radio, 1640 AM. This is the show, Utah Home Sweet Home. I'm your host, Yoshi Shiraki. Our special guest is real estate attorney Jeff Braylio. Jeff, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, good morning, and thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So today's topic, guys, is seller financing. Now, you probably heard the term before. You may or may have not heard the term before, but for those of you who have heard the term before, you're probably wondered, how's it structured? How does it go down? And you know, with so much uncertainty in the world right now, there have been a lot of loan packages that have been discontinued that were, available just as early as this year, and they no longer exist. So I have a feeling that seller financing will be a phenomenal opportunity in the next 12 to 24 months for a lot of people to be able to purchase homes. So
Yeah, and sell.
So
you have to remember seller finance from both the seller perspective and the buyer perspective.
Yep.
Right?
Right.
There are a lot of sellers that, especially if they lose their job or have a downgrade in pay, can't make mortgage,
Right.
Find themselves in financial trouble, need to move. This could be a good opportunity, especially if they're thin on their equity in the house.
Yep.
And the market downturn, they can't sell their house for any equity, and they can't sell on the open market.
Right.
Seller financing is an option for sellers to be able to relieve themselves of a burden and pass the house on to somebody who can manage it.
Very great point. Very great point. So I'm excited to hear a little bit more about seller financing. I've actually done some seller financing myself, but I wouldn't say I'm the expert. I'd say Jeff's the expert. Jeff is who I go to structure my seller financing.
Yes, I've seen a few in my day.
Yes. So let's just start off by if you don't mind, Jeff, explain to the listeners out there who may have never heard of seller financing. What does that exactly mean? Because they're probably thinking, how am I going to finance the sale of my house?
Yes, seller financing in the real estate investor world is a very large topic. Mm-hmm. So it covers a lot of ground. It covers a lot of types of transactions. And so there's really kind of four main ways of seller financing. Broadly speaking, seller financing is anytime the seller helps out the buyer in purchasing the house.
Got it.
Right? It could be helping finance a portion of the house or partner with them on the house. In some way, the seller is helping the buyer either get into or manage the property, and there's some relationship between the buyer and the seller. Because in most retail transactions, the seller sells the house to the buyer,
Yep.
and after closing, the seller literally disappears. They can go anywhere they want, never matters, because there's no more relationship with the buyer. The buyer gets the house and goes on their merry way.
Right.
But in seller financing, there's going to be this relationship that exists between the buyer and the seller, even after the closing or
Right.
after the transaction.
Gotcha. Perfect. And usually it's primarily because the current loan that was in place when the seller owned it stays in place, right?
Yeah, well, if there's a couple of variations on
Okay.
that. So, sometimes the seller might own the house outright.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And the seller is, maybe concerned about capital gains taxes.
Yes.
Right? If the amount of equity in the house is greater than $250,000 or $500,000, those capital gains tax exemptions,
Right.
they may be concerned about a tax burden,
Yeah.
or they could be looking for some extra income.
Right.
And if they finance the portion of the purchase price to the buyer, they can actually make interest income and make more than actually what they sold the house for. So they can
Right.
make more money.
Right.
There's a lot of benefits to the seller.
Yes.
That may encourage the seller to sell or finance the deal, even if they have no mortgage.
Right.
And sometimes if they do have a mortgage and equity even,
Yeah.
there are ways that the seller can make more money or avoid taxes by doing a seller financing transaction and even leaving that mortgage in place.
Gotcha.